Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hi guys, how are you doing? I hope that all of us are doing well and having a great day. So, in this video, I am Zahrotul Puspita Nuryani with Linggar Mayang Mawarni and Resti Ayu Febriani would like to explain about language, history, and change. Details of targeted topics are family tree, comparative reconstruction, the history of English, and diachronic and synchronic variation. Please pay attention and happy watching. Family tree. The Sanskrit language, whatever be its antiquity, is a wonderful structure. During the 19th century, a term came into use to describe that common ancestor. It incorporated the notion that this was the original form of a language, proto, that was the source of modern language in the Indian subcontinent, Indo, and in Europe, European. With Proto-Indo-European as the place as long ago great-great-grandmother, scholars set out to identify the branches of the Indo-European family tree, tracing the lineage of many modern languages. Indo-European is the language family with the largest population and distribution in the world, but it isn't the only one. Many of these are in danger of extinction, while a few are expanding. And this is the figure that shows a small selection of the Indo-European language in their family branches. Family connection. One way to get a clear picture of how they are related is through looking at records of an older generation, like Latin and Sanskrit, from which the modern evolved. And here are some examples. The word father and brother. Cognates. A cognate of a word in one language is a word in another language that has similar form and is or was used with a similar meaning. By the same process, we can look at similarity sets in Spanish and Italian and conclude that these cognates are good evidence of a common ancestor in the Italic branch of Indo-European.
Comparative reconstruction. Using information from these sets of cognates, we can embark on a procedure called comparative reconstruction. The aim of this procedure is to reconstruct what must have been the original or proto-form in the common ancestral language. The majority principle is very straightforward. If in a cognate set, three words begin with a p sound, and one word begin with a p sound, then our best guess is that the majority have retained the original sound, p. The most natural development principle is based on the fact that certain types of sound change are very common whereas others are extremely unlikely. The direction of change described in each case, 1 to 4, has been commonly observed, but the reverse has not. 1. Final vowels often disappear. For example, vino to vin. 2. Voiceless sounds become voiced, typically between vowels. For example, muta to muda. 3. Stops become fricative. For example, ripa become riva. Consonants become voiceless at the end of the words. For example, rizu to riz. Sound reconstruction. If we were faced with some examples from three languages, as shown below, we could make a start on comparative reconstruction by deciding what was the most likely form of the initial sound in the original source of all three languages. Since the written forms can often be misleading, we check that the initial sounds of the words in languages A and B are all k. sounds, while in language C the initial sounds are all ch sounds. Through this type of procedure we have started on the comparative reconstruction of the common origins of some words in Italian A, Spanish B, and French C. In this case, we have a way of checking our reconstruction because the common origin for these three languages is known to be Latin. Word reconstruction. Looking at a non-Indo-European set of examples, we can imagine receiving the following data from a linguist recently returned from an expedition to a remote region of the Amazon. Using the majority principle, we can suggest that the older forms will most likely be based on language B or language C. If this is correct, then the consonant change must have been P to B, T to D, and K to G in order to produce the later forms in language A. There is a pattern in these changes that follows one part of the most natural development principle. For example, voiceless sound became voiced between vowels, so the words in language B and C must be older forms than those in language A. The history of English. Old English. We have the term Anglo-Saxons to describe these people, and from the name of the first tribe that we get the word for their language English and their new home England. From this early version of English, now called Old English, we have many of the most basic terms in the language. They were the Vikings and it is from their language, Old Norse, that the original forms of give, law, lag, skin, sky, take and they were adopted. It is from their winter festival that we have as a term for the Christmas season. Middle English. The language of the peasants remained English. The peasants worked on the land and reared sheep, cows, and swine, words from Old English, while the upper classes talked about mutton, beef and pork, words from French origins. Hence the different term in modern English to refer to this creature on the hoof as opposed to on the plate. Throughout this period, France, or more accurately an English version of French, was the prestige language and Chaucer tells us that one of his Canterbury pilgrims could speak it. Sound changes. Sound loss. A sound change in which a particular sound is no longer used in a particular language. For example, the velar fricative X in Scottish Welsh, but not in modern English. Another example is a velar fricative X that was used in the older pronunciation of "nicht" as "next", closer to the modern German pronunciation of "nach", but is absent in the contemporary form "night" as "night". The sound change known as metathesis involves a reversal in position of two sounds in a word. This type of reversal is illustrated in the changed versions of these words from their earlier forms. For example, action to ask, first to first, brennen to burnen, become burn, breed to bird, Rus to horse, and wasps to wasp. The reversal of position in metathesis can sometimes occur between non-adjoining sounds. The Spanish word palabra is derived from the Latin parabola through the reversal of the l and r sound. Another type of sound change, known as epenthesis, involves the addition of a sound to the middle of a word. For example, "emptic" to "empty", "spinel" to "spindle", "timber" to "timber". One other type of sound change worth noting, though not found in English, occurs in the development of other languages. It involves the addition of a sound to the beginning of a word and is called prothesis. It is a common feature in the evolution of some forms from Latin to Spanish, as in this example: "scola" to "escuela", which mean "school", and "spiritus" to "espíritu", which mean "spirit". Spanish speakers who are starting to learn English as a second language will sometimes put a prothesic vowels at the beginning of some English words, with the result that words like strange and story may sound like estrange and a story. Syntactic and semantic changes. Syntactic changes. We find the subject-verb-object order most common in modern English, but we can also find a number of different orders that are no longer used. Less obviously, many words have case to be used. A number of expressions such as "lo", "verily", or "egat" are immediately recognized as belonging to a much earlier period, along with certain medieval-sounding names such as Bertha, Egbert, and Percival. An example of broadening of meaning is the change from "holiday" as a religious feast to the very general break from work called a holiday. We have broadened the use of fodder from animals to talk about all kinds of food. The reverse process, called narrowing, has overtaken the Old English word "hunt", once used for any kind of dog, but now, as "hound", used only for some specific breeds. Another example is "mate", once used for any kind of food, which has in its modern form "meat" because restricted to only some specific types. A different kind of narrowing can lead to a negative meaning for some words, such as "vulgar", which used to mean simply ordinary, and "naughty", which used to mean having nothing.
Diachronic and synchronic variation. Diachronic linguistics is the study of language through different periods in history. It is one of the two main temporal dimensions of language study, identified by Swiss linguist Ferdinand de Saussure in his course in General Linguistics, 1916. Synchronic linguistics is the study of language at given point at time. The time studied may be either the present or a particular point in the past. Synchronic analysis can also be made of dead language such as Latin. Synchronic linguistics is contrasted with diachronic linguistics. Each new generation has to find a way of using the language of the previous generation. In this unending process, whereby each individual child has to recreate the language of the community, there is an unavoidable propensity to pick up some elements exactly and others only approximately. There is also the occasional desire to be different. Given this heterogeneous transmission process, it should be expected that language will not remain stable and that change and variation are inevitable. The conclusion is, in language history and change, there are family traits begin with the Sanskrit language, whatever be its antiquity, is a wonderful structure. Proto-Indo-European established as some type of great-great-grandmother. Scholars set out to identify the branches of the Indo-European family tree, tracing the lineage of many modern languages. Indo-European is the language family with the largest population and distribution in the world, but it isn't the only one. And then family connection is one way to get a clearer picture of how they are related through looking at records of an older generation, like Latin and Sanskrit, from which the modern evolved. A cognatus of a word in one language is a word in another language that has a similar form and is or was used with a similar meaning. And then diachronic linguistics is the study of language through different periods in history. And then synchronic linguistics is the study of language at given point at time. That's all our presentation about language history and change. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.